Well, I will be a bit of a devil's advocate, and unlike gentlemen here, I will deal with the context a bit more. So I would go back to the question you imposed on this panel: is a multipolar world order viable? And I think that question already assumes that we understand the nature of the world we are entering. And I'm not convinced that we really do. When you look most of our modern history, we explained international politics through the distribution of power between the states. And this is where we spoke about unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity, because states were seen as the core organizers of order. And that's not the case anymore. They are still there, but we have power that is more distributed and even more fragmented. So I don't think that governments have this exclusive control over the forces that are shaping global politics, especially when you look at the energy and technology sector. So that changes not only who holds the power, but I think it changes how power behaves. And when you take a look at the fragmented power, you can see that it creates dependencies rather than balances. It produces systemic shocks rather than isolated crises. So instead of asking how many poles the world will have, I think we should ask whether the architecture of international order itself is basically fundamentally changing. Because now, what appears to be separate challenges are, in fact, expressions of the same structural transition. So this also changes the meaning of the energy security. We all know that energy is no longer just a commodity, you know? It has become strategic infrastructure. And with such infrastructure, I think that countries possess options. And I think optionality is power, too. And this is particularly relevant for Southeast Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, because these regions, I would say, are becoming parts of Europe's strategic center because they connect energy, trade, security, infrastructure. And I'm not convinced that EU really understands still that fact. When we are talking about the EU yesterday, we all had the pleasure of listening to Enrico Letta. I admire him, really, you know, and his report is excellent. But I think he was overly optimistic when he spoke about a growing sense of European unity. And I would respectfully challenge that. I think we often in Europe confuse unity of reaction with unity of purpose. Yes, Europe has been remarkably good. It shows in responding collectively to crisis. But what Europe still lacks, and it's connected to the energy security as well, is the agreement on the strategic destination beyond those crises. We have strong institutions, but we don't have European demos. And one cannot build political communities just with treaties, you know. So we can probably agree that the social Darwinism of Trump's America and the authoritarian nature of China's system are not the models that Europe should aspire to in any respect. The question is then, what should Europe aspire to instead? And I think it shouldn't be a single ideological model. It should be a resilient framework that protects the democracy, protects the rule of law, the single market and national diversity, allowing each member state to pursue its own path. And suddenly, when you think about it, the attitude towards enlargement and everything else should be changed. I think that Europe's strength has always been its ability to unite different nations around common rules rather than common identities. And to wrap up, my argument is very simple. We are no longer living through a temporary crisis within otherwise stable system. I think we are living through a structural transition in which the frameworks that once organized power, meaning, and decision-making no longer fit the world we are meant to govern. And that disorder that we are experiencing is not an interruption. And I think this is very important to understand. I think it is a new condition, you know? And it is something I deeply explore in my upcoming book called The New Disorder. And let me just conclude. I think that our greatest mistake is believing that increasingly complex problems can be solved with increasingly simple political narrative. And they cannot. The defining challenge of our time, for me, is not a prediction. Even my clients are coming to me for that. I think it is the intellectual adaptation.